Welcome, everybody. This is part of our monthly webinar series. We are connecting with thought leaders around different industries that we care about. Just a quick intro about Loft. We are an integrated design agency that works on physical and digital products, and really think ourselves as ecosystem developers. A lot of the stuff we do is SaaS or I would say maybe wearables with an IoT platform, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole gamut, mainly in regulated industries, so med tech, life sciences, but also fintech. And obviously, we also started working a little bit more in mobility over the last years, as it's another regulated industry that is emerging, and the technologies there are pretty exciting. I want to get started. As I said in my intro, and now everybody's online. Robert Quintero can't join us today. He actually got COVID yesterday, so he apologizes. And hopefully he'll get better soon. I want to make a quick introduction about our next month webinar, actually. It's called Forging the Future of Mobility. And we are talking about basically micro-mobility, the 15-minute city, how technology is really emerging with the electrification of the sector, and how we actually can, as humans, improve mobility while also becoming more carbon neutral. So look for that. It's going to be on June 20th, and we'll have more details on our newsletter soon. So let's get started. I want to make quick introductions, and I'm going to start with Allison. Allison was actually featured in an interview in a couple months ago in our newsletter, and we had a wonderful conversation, and from that it kind of evolved the idea for this webinar. And Allison is actually at the intersection of research and design, and I want to give him a moment to introduce himself, but he's doing really exciting stuff and calls in from Denmark.
That's right. Yeah. I'm based here in Denmark, even though I'm originally from the United States. I've been working in healthcare for about 11 years and in research and design for about 16 or 17. And I'm really looking forward to having the conversation today.
Excellent. And our second panelist today is Clotilde Grimault. Clotilde is actually our director of product. She originally is from France, as you probably will hear from her accent, but maybe she can tell the rest of her story.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today. My name is Clotilde. I am the director of product for Loft. I started my career in mechanical engineering, and I veered towards data science. And so I have developed very complex ecosystems, and in particular at Phillips in the Netherlands for 12 years prior to joining Loft. And so I'm super excited to talk with the two of you about our experience designing ecosystems.
Excellent. Well, I want to get started because I think one of the key insights we had when we put this panel together was that everybody comes from a slightly different background, right? So Clotilde is coming from engineering, Alison is coming from design, and the world is getting more complicated, right? So you have to be much more of a cross-functional thinker. The human centricity of these solutions is really detriment to its success, as the technical aspects can really overwhelm users very easily. And this idea of cognitive load in the digital ecosystem is real, where you can make something work, but the fact that somebody understands what even has to be done sometimes is lost in the past. So want to maybe talk a little bit and actually ask Clotilde, when you were at Phillips, I know that there was something called digital transformation that really happened about 12 years ago with most large companies, where people that traditionally would not be a tech brand had to really rethink their business models. Talk a little bit about how this happened at Phillips and what your best practices were from learning from that.
Yes, and obviously these my answers will represent my views and not Phillips' views, just to be clear. But what was fascinating to me is the importance of having a sponsor for all of these initiatives. It was fascinating to me how we always had somebody who had a vision, somebody who said, we must do it. This is non-negotiable. How do we do it? And so my favorite part was the interdisciplinary nature of the exercise, because it wasn't sufficient to have the engineers, the designers, the strategists, the business people. And so it was always so fascinating to have all these people thinking about their current experience, right? Their personal life. Everybody had access to a smartphone, and yet we were thinking about something else. In my time at Phillips, I was working a lot on the personal care experience, so shaving, grooming devices. And while we were working on these things that had a very rich legacy and history, what was fascinating is that we all had experience in our personal time. We were listening to podcasts on our devices. We were kind of using digital solutions for our personal lives. And so here was really the imagination that was our limit, and including for the stakeholders. So multidisciplinary teams dreaming together, and then start slow, right? So how can we make something happen in a small scale so then we can, test and iterate quickly? So digital transformation to me is kind of, it was innovation. It was kind of the way we've always done innovation, but with this mindset of digital as a goal. So that was my experience. How about you, Allison?
Yeah, exactly. I want to maybe switch over to Alice. Maybe you can have a different approach and also insert basically that the digital transformation, I would say as a mandate really came out of IT, and I think that over time, corporations realized that if they didn't really focus on research strategy, understanding the human better, that these systems actually were not really that successful, right?
Hmm. I'm just writing down that I was reflecting on that. That if you were to consider digital as a facilitator of some sort of thing, and so we transform with that digital to make a product, a service, a situation more digital. Two things come to mind when I start to think about that, and I should also just like Clotilde mentioned, everything I say is only a representative of a personal opinion and may not necessarily represent reflect the current or former employers I have. But all that being said, I can't help but think, like, when we think about digital in the space of something like healthcare, a question that comes up is what could possibly be achieved more effectively or with less stress for someone by making a component or a portion of that digital. So in that sense, is there some part of a treatment space? Is there some part of a navigation pathway through a healthcare system that could be less burdensome, less confusing by way of digital? Now, you could say by way of anything at that point, by way of generative AI, by way of blank. In that sense, we're marrying, hopefully, some sort of technology that's employed to provide, first and foremost, the value that you start with. So that's one part. The other question then becomes, like, is there something we could now accomplish that we just couldn't accomplish before X, in this case, digital? Both of those questions, like, can we make things provide more value that are already there by adding digital, or could we achieve new things that we couldn't achieve beforehand? I think are two kind of starting point questions that I found have been relevant regardless of the industry that I've worked with, but definitely in a healthcare space where very often you are asked to create either a clinical outcome or a personal outcome or an outcome in terms of a person's day-to-day life that is hugely meaningful and relevant. And if you can't, then maybe digital wasn't necessarily the thing that was going to facilitate that, or perhaps there's something else that could. But I'm a big advocate of going back to that core question, which is what are we trying to accomplish, and will a digital execution help us do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I remember about 10, 15 years ago when we started working in kind of like this digital physical interactions, a lot of clients came to us and said, we want an app. And then we said, so why do you want an app? Well, everybody has an app, we need to have an app. And then, it was just this like really interesting briefs we would get as an agency. We had to uncover that, we had to unwrap that, say like, well, what's your human experience right now? How can you enable technology? How does I still say this, the best app is no app, right? And it's really critical as a developer to not follow the pitfalls, say just because we can build it, that we have. right? But especially the work you've done, Alison, I think also the work that Clotilde has done, and Robert, who could join us unfortunately with Post-it, really was transformational in the way that these were useful solutions to urgent problems that could not be solved without a digital ecosystem. I think, and if you take that North Star and then really build an experience around it, the products get so much better and so much more focused on the task. And, and I think maybe a question for you, Alison, is that idea, like, what does the role of research play in that narrative?
So this question reminds me of a perspective that I saw another researcher bring up at Google, which I'll come to in a moment. But in the way I interpret that is, I think if research is providing another set of hopefully useful data to making informed decisions, in the same way that a business forecast or a technology analysis or a variety of these things are providing data points. Hopefully research is not only generating those data points, but also when done holistically, which is, and by that I mean not just user research, but technology research and competitive research triangulated, it could start creating perhaps more insights than just one set of data could alone. I mean, that's pretty straightforward when I think for many of us who do research to realize that comparing against multiple data points, data sets, different types, just gives us richer information. So I see it as contributing to hopefully more informed decisions and hopefully more informed, more successful experiments. And the perspective that this was making me think of was from the senior staff researcher at Google, who said something to the effect of like, everyone who's coming to the table when they're perhaps designing a product or imagining a service comes with the idea that they're being strategic. Just because you're coming with your user research insight doesn't necessarily mean that you are more or less strategic. Everyone has their strategy in mind. How we contribute to that and participate in that part is actually a ways in which we can meet each other to make better decisions. So in that sense, I see it as a part of a bigger communication and hopefully making that decision more robust because of it. At least that's the aspiration.
And one more thing in my experience with research and kind of the digital enablement is the long-term view. Historically, before everybody had a smartphone in their pocket, we had moments, right? We had kind of snapshots of what was happening to people at different times. And to me, the biggest change in a digital transformation is also we had this longitudinal journey. In a way, the fact that service design happened in the last 10, 15 years, or kind of really grew in the last 10, 15 years, is a kind of side effect of the fact that now we have a service. Before we had touch points, we had interaction moments, but now I think that that's what the app really enables, is the continuity, both from the user and from the service providers. Like, okay, now I know all of your trips in one place. I know all of your healthcare experiences in one place. And that to me is something that allows us to think in a different way as designers.
Yeah, and I mean, to build on that, I think we've always had experiences, but we could never
connect them
because we could never get the data on these like in between places, right? So now you know what screens you're not opening, and where you get stuck, where you leave a purchase in a checkout because you don't understand. Like all these like deficiencies of your system are becoming clear with data, right? And it's when we build a digital ecosystem, we really urge our clients to put analytics at the forefront and really use it as a deployment tool, but also like a scale tool, right? So because an app is never done, right? Like it's a forever game. There's a V1, a V2, a V3, but if you can derive insights from that development, from the actual data you collect in the journey, your experience becomes so much more meaningful.
And one more thing about the research. Sorry, go on, Alison.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Another thing about the research that I thought was so fascinating as part of my digital transformation journey is that kind of interconnection of design and engineering. To your point, Gregor, it used to be you had research and then you had design and then you had engineering. But now through that kind of agile release train, you have this very interconnected process and experience for everybody in the value chain of like, okay, what are we designing? Well, let's look at how, previous version of the app were used, and then you build on a technology solution, and then you look again, and like that is to me fascinating, the blending of research, design, and engineering that was not possible before.
Right. Yeah, and what's interesting is like, if you look at large businesses today, that are traditionally not from a tech background, right? I mean, Phillips built shavers. Novo Nordisk makes molecules, basically. How do you even create that intelligence, that structural intelligence within the organization to be able to leverage those systems, right? That and how does human centricity play in that game?
I have one perspective. Go ahead.
You go, Allison.
I have one perspective that at least I find that I try to connect to some of my conversations in the healthcare space. Whether I've been working for like a hospital group or a pharmaceutical group or a med tech group, there's often an interest in the result or the outcome of whatever intervention device molecule that's there. That's kind of the history, a very historical legacy approach towards designing things. We want to hopefully heal or help healing. Therefore, healing looks like X. It means this clinical biomarker is down or this amount of stress. Almost invariably, that involves a human, either a doctor or a person receiving that treatment or a person who's caregiving. I mean, that's the nature of this work. At some point, I feel it's imperative that whoever's working on the project is able to at least see enough of a tenuous connection between those behaviors and the attitudes and the outcome that we aim to have with this project, this organization. If that relationship is at least somewhat there, I feel like there's a conversation that could be started about how we're going to link certain feelings and certain behaviors to specific changes or improvements we'll make. But if that relationship is not there, and there are still stakeholders who almost are choosing not to or can't fully see why the dynamics of a human being has there, and that can sometimes happen. Sometimes people are very focused on a variety of things, and I can understand. But if that's not there, I find that it's hard to sort of propose or argue how human centrism or research is going to help, because that person may not necessarily be ready to see the connection. So my first conversation is, if you see that connection, great. Now let's talk about a way of taking action that we're going to hopefully see is rewarded by doing that. And that might be a research program. That might be a series of iterations that involve users. That might be a deep dive, whatever the format may be, but at least then there's a little bit of an understanding of it.
How important is storytelling in bringing these stakeholders along?
I can only speak for well, I shouldn't rephrase. There are, depending on the type of group that I've worked with in my career, it's been very different, more or less, and that sometimes based on the amount of time you have, the decision maker I'm working with, the group I'm working with. But I think one thing that's very interesting about the healthcare space, at least for me, is that I work with a variety of different chronic diseases, and some of those diseases are very familiar, such as maybe, say, diabetes, or they're more familiar than others. And some of them are very sometimes specific, and there's not many people in the world who, by comparison, not many people in the world who may be living with those. And in both cases, those are very different lived experiences that for many of us, we may never feel, like physically feel, emotionally feel. And those feelings have a profound impact on a person's behavior. And that's not me necessarily saying that. That's many, many other peer-reviewed scholars who've talked about this topic. So there's already a lot of literature that suggests that there's a lived experience with different conditions and diseases. And in that sense, bringing those in, logistically speaking, really can't fully be done as if I'm doing 30 interviews, which are all 2 hours each, and then 60 hours of it. I can't necessarily bring 60 hours to anyone, but I may have to find a format that is digestible for people to inherit those stories. And in that sense, if I may only have 5 to 10 minutes, it is a storytelling act, whatever that act may be. whether that is video storytelling, metaphors, anecdotes, a combination of slides, audio clips. Each of those is a means of saying, how do I take some sort of essence, if you will, from a deep lived experience and condense it to something that's still digestible and still actionable. Digestible and actionable are both important. Early on in my career, I think I didn't focus enough on making it actionable. I just thought about it being provocative. And now I find that like making the blend of it takes time, but man, it pays off with so much more response by the people who are participating in it.
Right. That's very interesting.
And the storytelling aspect is not only useful for internal conversations and stakeholders, but also with consumers, because to your earlier point, Gregor, about let's make an app. An engineer working on the program might say, I'm working on a connected shaver. Was like, a connected shaver, question mark. However, if you start saying, hey, shaving hurts, anybody who has had to shave says, yes, it's not a pleasant experience. It hurts physically. And how can we avoid the irritation rather than solve it afterwards? If you start telling consumer, this is what you get out of this thing. It's not about the connection. Who cares about the fact that it's connected? What it does is it avoids some of the literal pain of shaving and the after effects. And so the storytelling is so fundamental as part of the digital transformation towards the consumer. And that's why I think working with marketing was so fundamental throughout the digital transformation, because there was a lot of education / kind of imagination we had to trigger in our users to say, yes, we can do something about this using technology that is perhaps a little surprising, but come along for the ride and we'll improve, the situation together.
Right.
I think you're speaking to something really powerful, because I think one of the reasons stories have historically been so powerful, even agnostic of design and our craft, is just how much impact they can have when crafted well. Like the nature of an allegory, the nature of a metaphor, the nature of a simile. All of these are so powerful. They're called figures of speech because they do more than just their words. So whether that is to communicate something that we can't do, I think that's one of the reasons speculative design leans so heavily on it, because we may not even have the visual vocabulary or the technological ability to communicate a vision yet. But we can tell a really good story of that vision. And if that story is compelling enough, we can start to build a path towards it. And I've seen that done in small ways that I didn't realize was storytelling until at the end I realized, oh, you just unpacked a brand new system that didn't exist for a treatment, or you just expressed an idea that I've been trying to figure out how to describe it, but you've just explained how it felt. And that feeling is enough for me now to figure out, well, what's going to achieve that? And so there's a lot of power behind it.
And one more, building on that, another thing that to me happened with the digital transformation is the event of content as a design focus. Because when boxes were shipped to consumers, you had a packaging and you had the advertisement. Those were the things that you had to convince the consumer. But now you have other platforms, other touch points. And so the importance of content and kind of like the technical writing, the emotional writing, the kind of social media and other kind of influencing consumers has really changed from the old school advertising. And I think that was another thing that really tremendously changed with the event of digital solutions.
I think, I'm glad, sorry, go ahead.
Since Robert isn't here, I promise this is the last one, I promise. Since Robert isn't here, I feel like I have to give some positive acknowledgement to the work that he did with use. The app was called it was the Post-it app, yes?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. I think I just wanted to confirm that was public, and I believe it was. Yeah. So one of the things that I believe the storytelling element that I love there is, for such a long time, if for those of you who may have never used the Post-it app, it was one of the first movers when it comes to, pre-Miro, pre all of these tools, to be able to have Post-it notes that you would draw in the physical world, put it up on the wall, and then capture it. Those could be digitally captured and then put into the virtual world and kept as either images or text. And for the longest time, there was this vision, at least before the Post-it note app, of like, sometimes I just want to zoom out. Like I would use that language. I wish I could just zoom out and see everything and then really focus in on a detail. And I feel like that's always been a little bit of the romance of the Post-it note board, like the actual Post-it notes, that you could have a big mess of ideas and move them around. And the fact that you can quite literally zoom in and zoom out, you could see the big picture and hone in, is kind of the representation of that story. It just happens to be in the digital format. It just happened to express itself that way. I think that's one of the beauties of its simplicity, is it allowed people to do something that I wonder if maybe many people have been imagining in their minds for such a long time, but now it's finally made real because of the technology that's available.
Yeah, I think no, keep talking. I think this idea of giving ecosystems a purpose and then enabling humans to interact with that purpose and build on it, right? Really, that's the inspiration, right? Obviously, I think there is kind of this idea of I'm having a very powerful computer in my pocket, but the general user interactions have to change to make that really powerful, right? It's not a keyboard, it's not a mouse, it's not it is a camera that takes pictures of post-its and then synthesizes it. It is, a community of patients that can now interact with themselves, that exchange ideas. It is, basically uploading, downloading information. I think that's the power of these newfound solutions, that they are really kind of taking human insights and then deploying them in a systemic way, right? And and social media has got a bad rap, obviously, and we all live with the consequences. But at the tribal core, it is really kind of the village quarter, like where people now can come together in a virtual space the same way they used to come together in the center of the village, right? And that amplified around the globe is really what has changed our societies, right? In a sense, Arab Spring would have never happened without kind of subgroups in different countries being able to communicate with each other, and all these things are very, very large enablers, right? For all kinds of different things, right? So we have to harness that power with I think with a little bit of responsibility. And I mean, I want to bring up the next chapter in this responsibility, which is AI, right? So we are now at the dawn of a new era, and I would love to hear from you guys a little bit of like, how do you feel that ecosystems are evolving with generative AI, and what do we have to watch out for, and how do we as designers can empower it, give it purpose, but at the same time also, maybe create mechanisms that protect people of deploying these in an effective manner.
So what
I would
the most, yeah.
Go ahead. I always like to bring maybe some talking points. I always like to bring this example of, in an ideal world, let's say, breast cancer screening is an expensive trade. So a lot of breast cancer in, women gets not detected early enough, because sometimes they're too young. And, this is just right now, it's basically, okay, you're a certain age, you're going to have increased detection because the likelihood of your breast cancer is going to increase. But there's many, many young women that have breast cancer because they never get screened, right? So with the emerging, AI systems, you could screen everybody much more often, right? So how do you make that decision? How do you build that system? How do you make that, a meaningful change? How does that reimbursement work, right? There's many, many stakeholders, as Alice knows too well, probably in the value chain of healthcare, that we have to consider on building these systems.
What I was gonna jump on with ecosystems is the importance of data as the glue around the ecosystem. And as the data and AI lead for Phillips for a number of years, that the most fascinating thing to me is that all these technologies are managed by humans. And so you have a data engineer, you have a data architect, you have a privacy officer. And to me, the reason why we were all very respectful of the consumer's integrity, privacy, etc., is the checks and balances and kind of like the values of the company around it, right? So we were very respectful of our data, our consumers' data. And so to me, AI is just another solution as long as there are regulatory framework that really put the very big conditions for playing in place. I think that's a mandatory. And then at the end, it's humans really thinking about other humans. And so I as an engineer, I kind of had to learn about the whole, like let's say in my career, I learned about the strategy and the insights and then the research side of things. And service design to me is so fundamental because we need to understand the human at both the worker and the user of the system for AI. To me, AI is just another technology. So we just need to approach it like other technologies in terms of guardrails.
I resonate with much of what you're describing, and I think if it's a means to an end and it just happens to be a really powerful means to maybe new ends, I think it's compelling. Two thoughts come to mind, when, at least as I've been reflecting on recent advancements. And one of them is specific to healthcare, which is, or especially relevant to healthcare, which is I'm especially interested in making sure that whenever an execution is employed, it does no harm, which is a classic comment. And arguably we should be doing that in every industry, but it's especially relevant when you start dealing with people's bodies and their physical health, which also has a connection to their other forms of health. So as I start to see more and more regulation that exists in that place, and more indications as to what makes for a robust and secure and safe environment, this isn't just good because that's good practice and good solid infrastructure. I wonder if that's also going to start contributing to a little bit more a change in the relationship we have with AI, because I still sense that based on at least the data sets I'm seeing, it's not equivocally one sided or another. It's not like everyone loves it or everyone's afraid that it's going to take your jobs. It is sometimes quite polarizing in different places and for different reasons in different industries. Even on the country level, Ipsos did a study last year that looked across the globe, and it's very different around that. And so the other thing that comes to mind is that when we start to see what it can and can't do, artificial intelligence, I think much like the other technological breakthroughs that we have been able to integrate into some of our solutions, whether that's social media, modern connectivity, ways in which radio broadcasting allows for 3G, 4G, 5G internet, all of these things are a means, they kind of are accelerants. I think that each of them has benefits and each of them has limitations. I think this is one where there's a little bit of a grasp that I think a little bit of a understanding moment that may need to occur for a period of time where we kind of grasp what are the limitations of this. Because if we were to go back to the original question you mentioned about an ecosystem, I kind of see a little bit of AI. I think you used the glue metaphor. I sometimes think of it as like an organism with multiple touch points that beforehand was connected with a nervous system, which might have been digital or might have been your company's infrastructure. But now it has this hyper intelligent nervous system that's able to almost form and react to each other. There's still a lot of data suggesting that even people who are designing with AI may not always fully know like what it is that's actually being designed, like exactly those dynamics. That's both extremely exciting and a little bit concerning to me, but not so concerning that it'll stop things. It just makes me want to be extra safe with this. And I'm glad that we've had a few lessons from previous technologies that have emerged, like social media, to say, yeah, we should really be considerate whenever we start to employ advanced technology, just to make sure. I mean, I'm basically describing the plot of a number of Twilight Zone issues. Let's be careful about what we wish for and how we implement things so that we're deploying things that are going to help, not hurt.
Yep. No, I think, sometimes you're afraid that the gold rush of, getting the next product out is gonna hurt the longevity of some of these really exciting transformations. I mean, Alison, you're right. I think there is a huge potential in really, taking a combination of, let's say, mobile deployed ecosystems and AI to create many very exciting solutions for people around the world. I think it takes designers and researchers and strategists and technologists to really put that together in a meaningful way.
And in a way that 15 years ago, it was, I want an app. Now it's like, I want an AI. Okay, yes, but why, how, what are the limitations? How do we make it happen to solve an actual problem in a way that can be solved with this technology? So I think the team members who've been around for that previous digital transformation revolution can be there for this one, saying, yes, sure, we'll do an AI and we'll take all the normal, careful considerations, starting with the consumer, because it needs to solve a problem in a way that is trustworthy and works.
Right. And I think like any regulated industry, right? So that's probably where I see like healthcare and health tech being a little bit of an advantage, right? Any regulated industry is tightly controlled, financial services as well. So, there's guide rails that have to be in place. You can't just, deploy large language model and put your patients in and hope for the best. The FDA actually is really evolving their thinking around AI, quite frequently, actually. And for all of us who follow the FDA pretty closely, it is interesting to see that they are actually, really kind of learning from industry experts and really are trying to manage this in a considered fashion. So these ecosystems are safe, can be deployed, and are not in risk of hurting patients and decreasing health outcomes.
But for sure, AI is a very exciting development, and obviously, as innovators, we are deeply tickled by this new technology. So,
yep.
I actually think that's the appropriate word, because it's to me, there's a little bit of curiosity, and it's almost, who was it? Was it Arthur C. Clarke who said something to the effect of, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And to some extent, it looks like I'm watching a magic trick. And that is tickling, and it's unique. And I think the part of me that is the concern part is, I know that it's not magic because something is making this happen. And that's the kind of, okay, I'd like to know a little bit more about the mechanics of this. And I think that's fair for anyone who might be using an in solution as well. So I think there's going to be a huge effort when we start to empower ecosystems with more and more generative AI elements or deep learning elements or whatever, because we've been using AI for years. Thank you, spell check. It's one of my favorite, like, basic but important AIs. As it gets more and more sophisticated, I think there's also there's the responsibility for designers to create an environment that feels safe and feels as though it's trustworthy. In addition to actually being safe and actually being trustworthy, that's going to be a new kind of material of experience design that I'm really fascinated to see. How are we going to trust these extremely powerful forces, which are confined to systems, but still kind of beyond at least some amount of comprehension, to make really important decisions for us? Like, it's going to be fascinating.
And I think it almost takes a new, I feel like our job descriptions are constantly being rewritten, right? I mean, you used to be a mechanical engineer, and then you used to be an industrial designer, and then you used to be an UX designer. Like, I feel like this is all merging. There's a technology aspect, there is a research aspect, there is there's all these different divisions that are coming together to create a holistic experience. And you have to, you don't have to be an expert in all of them, but you have to be somewhat, native in understanding how to deploy, or what the potential of deployment can be, right? Even if you don't write code, you have to understand how code works. Even if you don't do data science, you have to understand how does data science come together. There is, I feel like it's an exciting time for cross-functional teams that really jive together, because it's 1 + 1 is 5. It's not 2. And I feel like I see this all the time, that we end up working with data scientists, we end up working with hardware developers, with software developers, we end up working with researchers, qualitative, quantitative researchers, all of them, just to really make these ecosystems as well honed and as well deployed as possible.
Yeah.
Indeed, and again, the most fascinating part to me is that even in a black box AI system, we do have levers, right? We can say a little bit less on the foul side and a little bit more on the friendly side. And so even if the algorithms kind of do their soup a little bit without our hands in it, to me, we have so much power, and the voice of consumer is so fundamental, because by listening to the voice of consumer, we can, say, okay, that was too far. And so we, even with a black box system, we have a lot of control. Which data sets do you use to train your AI? Back to your example, Gregor, with the breast cancer screening, like, how do we change behaviors so that the data can be there, so that the AI can do its job? There's so much human, and we do, even with kind of complex systems, it is about the dream, and articulating the dream can make all the difference in getting, maybe not there, because we don't know where there is right this second, but somewhere that evolves into a beautiful butterfly at the end.
Right. And I think, what's fascinating is that, there is quite a bit of drug companies now that are actually using computational models to discover new drugs, right? So they're basically looking on the very molecular level, and they're deploying AI to see if there's any opportunity for disease management with just moving around AIs on molecules. And this is, it used to be that you would build you would prototype the molecule and then you would try it out. Now you actually kind of computationally create it before you even have to and understand their traits, to obviously not the end gestalt, but to a certain level before you even start a bioreactor. So it's a fascinating time, or that there might be many diseases that we solve in our lifetime with the help of AI, that we never thought we could actually tackle, like cancer, right? I think another example that I always get excited is that with I would say cardiovascular disease may be diminishing through actually the help of Novo Nordisk to some regard, but also other help. Maybe there's more research that can actually then focus on AI and focus on some of these I would say more niche diseases that didn't have the attention that it had in the past. So I think AI also has an opportunity for democratization of drug discovery, drug development, but also overall ecosystem development.
One thing that I'm not too worried about is the need for the human in the loop. We need so many humans in the loop of the AI. Like, while the AI can kind of try things, the humans is always going to be there for the expertise, the common sense, the context. And so that is one thing that, to me, it's so much more of an opportunity than it is about a threat to innovation, society, and humans as a group.
Right.
I would agree with you. I see, in the sense that I think human involvement, I've yet to see a really compelling case that, and perhaps they exist and I just haven't seen it, a really compelling case that suggests completely human agnostic activities and processes that would have optimal success for everyone involved, including humans and the systems. So now, again, it may very well exist, and I just haven't encountered it. There's some amount of human involvement that's there, at least if we are seeing these as tools and technologies that are meant to hopefully advance human conditions. I think one of the things that I can't help to think about is to almost see it the same way I might see another collaborator or another thing that has intelligence, whether that's natural intelligence or artificial intelligence or human intelligence, that a lot of the limitations that at least I sometimes encounter with some of the more recent deployments of generative AI might also be some of the same limitations I might see with someone who just maybe very well trained and recently equipped with certain skills, but perhaps may not have some of the, I think you used the phrase common sense, or perhaps some of the more experience that helps to I guess, discriminate, if you will, and determine what specific details and what specific changes might make something a little bit more X or Z. And because of that, I see it as like a collaborator to work with, a collaboration, because that collaborator, just whether that was a junior employee that's joining me who's happened to be exceptionally good at copywriting, or a new doctor who's just been trained in all of the new medical materials, there are some places where I could coexist with that person and hopefully help that intelligence do more. And it can also show me things that I wasn't considering. So I see that's as odd and as kind of creepy as it sounds to see AI as a collaborator. I see that it's similar to the dynamics of collaboration. We go back and forth and hopefully teach each other something in the process of it, and maybe surprise each other. But it may be that if we just did our things independently, the AI over here, me, we would have some different results with different types of success.
Yeah, I think this idea of a co-pilot is really emerging, right? So, doctors usually know how to do their job, but, if they're in an emergency room and they're stressed out, sometimes, having a co-pilot that actually says, hey, look at that shadow on that, CAT scan. That's something you might want to, let me just highlight the 5 areas where you would like take a closer look. That's really helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we will see more and more systems that work that way. We have about 15 minutes left. If anybody from our listeners wants to have a question, please drop it in the chat and we can attack it there. But actually, David had a question. How do you think that design? How do you find that the design in the context of healthcare and by the proxy of people? David, maybe you can rephrase this.
Yeah, maybe I can.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. You kind of answered it when you were speaking about building models, right? And I think that is so without, I mean, you want to fail early, right? When you're designing something and maybe break things, but when people's lives are at stake, the stakes are higher. I've kind of moved on from that question. If you think it's relevant and a smart question.
No, I think it's highly relevant. So, in medtech development, you always think of the risk, the hazard-induced risk scenario, right? So what can possibly go wrong? And then you have to build a system that actually derives an outcome that is, favorable for the human. And really, you can prototype that, right? I mean, we do many, I would say prototype deployments where we test things. We make sure that, systems actually are feeding you back into a positive use state. And I'd love to hear from Allison on, because I mean the role of a prototype is immensely important, and it's becoming, even with AI, you actually have to build the product, and then you have to train the product with data, and then you have to use that data to refine the product. So there's many more steps than in a conventional product development, life cycle.
There's a special place in my heart, and will continue to be, for those who are part of the detailed human factors research, engineering, and development process, which is its own subsection in design research, which has its own kind of experiment norms and models. And for those who've worked in healthcare or aviation or anything where it's a regulated industry, it's a pretty specific process. You might have encountered it in engineering or design school, but I find it to be just as interesting, but for different reasons than, say, early stage generative research. But I think the thing that especially is interesting to so many different groups is, what are the specific behaviors that we notice when someone's interacting with this concept or this prototype that will eventually be surgical equipment, or will eventually be a new CAT scan machine, or eventually be a combination injector. And I'm still, to this date, after doing all of this thing, still so interested to see the little nuances in the behaviors that I sometimes will see for the very first time, even though I might have been working on a product for a period of years, or a similar metaphor for a product for a similar of years, which I think also speaks to AI as well, which is there's always new data to learn from and train on. I don't think I wish it was as easy to say, hey, I know it all, now we're done, and now I can answer every question. But I've yet to find any specific global healthcare challenge that's as simple as that. Otherwise, I think perhaps it could have been solved by now. And I deviated from it. All to say is, like, the detailed rigor of human factors, I think, is something that I would love to see consistently be applauded and acknowledged more and more, because some of the medical devices we live with has needed to, for legal reasons, but also for quality reasons, go through that really extenuating or a really extensive, detailed process to get into your hands eventually. So
yeah, I
basically
totally
a love note to human factors engineering. So.
it is a love note. I am actually, whenever I am, in an operating room and I see procedures, I'm always so fascinated of the attention to detail these devices really have to follow to be as effective and powerful as they are. And I would say the other thing that I want to applaud medtech developers is really that it used to be, you used to leverage the skill of the doctor, and really rely on them to have the finesse to a positive health outcome. And a lot of these modern developments really make it much easier for doctors, because doctors have to print out a health chart, make sure they get to the next appointment, talk to the nurse. They have a cognitive overflow of data that is approaching them. So with a well-designed medical device that just makes it so easy to put a suture on or put a catheter in, or it's fascinating to see how much better these devices are designed now than they've even been 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And to me, the way to reach still the outcome that we need is to calibrate the human/machine interaction, right? So just like with a self-driving car, there's a moment where it says, my cameras don't give me the confidence that I can drive on this, dark, rainy road. Can you please take control? And so knowing where to stop and put the human back in the loop for security, moral, or kind of ethics reason, like, okay, now I'm not sure anymore, says the machine. Please take your common sense and your context back into your hands. And so to me, there are ways to calibrate the use of the AI to still reach the outcome we need.
Right. And I think, we see a much better, I would say, we see a much better handling of fringe use cases with modern systems, including and potentially through AI, right? Where the anticipatory outcome of a system is already being modeled by the AI versus just, in the olden days, it used to be like, error, something is wrong. Now it's like,
Right.
hey, we think you didn't connect this, line correctly. Maybe you want to check it.
Or I know I'm on thin ice here, please help.
Yeah,
Like the
exactly.
awareness, even like we can program into the AI of saying, I don't know. And
Right. Yeah, I think that's the real power we're seeing. That's the sea change. And it takes a lot of design, research strategy to make that all magic, right? Alton said this before, like technology seems to be magic, and there's a reason, because there's many, many people that think about the small stuff, a lot the value along the value chain. We have about 7 minutes. I don't know if anybody has more questions or wants to give us some insights. I think
Yeah,
one.
I have a question. So one of the things that I've noticed in terms of generative AI, sort of coming to the market was it felt kind of hurried, with OpenAI and ChatGPT kind of coming to the market, and then you've got this flood of questionable questionable generative AI results and searches, like Google telling people to eat rocks and put bleach in recipes and things like that. So I wonder, from sort of maybe a healthcare perspective, how to come back from, I don't want to say the damage that's already been done, but the maybe negative PR around generative AI, and how you as designers can sort of resuscitate the reputation when you work it into your products.
Yeah, I can take a first stab at this. We have a client that we've been working on large language models for actually 5 years, and it's for drug discovery. And it's basically, it's a report writing tool. And when you write a medical report for a new drug, there cannot be any error, right? So I feel like that the health tech sector has much tighter guide rails around what's possible. and how these systems work than, I would say, general purpose AI solutions, just because the risk of going wrong it's much higher, right? And I think that I'm pretty confident that, I mean, never say never, but I'm pretty confident that the risk introduced by an AI model in a med device is at least similar to the risk that is introduced by any other stakeholder, humans, technology failures, material fatigue. We know that med devices and med solutions are failing, but they have to fail in a way that they're not harming patients.
I love your question, Jonathan, because I think that is a very, very valid and kind of pointed concern. My belief on this one is that trust has to be earned. Trust between technology providers and technology users is not a given. And I think that's the case for every technology, but in particular with AI, because there's so much, news floating on everybody's news feed, right? And so I think that gaining trust is actually a very important part of designing solutions. And that is part of that onboarding and kind of like deployment of a solution. And I think we as designers, what we can do is acknowledge that trust has to be gained. And how do we put safeguards in the beginning of the user journey so that they progressively kind of grow their trust into the system over time, because it's not going to happen at once, and we need to be particularly considerate of the beginning of the user interaction.
Yep, I agree with you. Actually, there was a question that was really helpful, and I think I want to bring that up as maybe we also have to think about biases, right? AI has biases, and a lot of times it comes through limited data sets, right? So there's the famous, misdiagnosis of skin conditions because of darker skin having a different viscosity. There was not enough data, where really there is a very real outcome challenge, right? With these systems, if we don't consider all humans and have enough data of all humans to test them out and find this and there is obviously, I think there's a real bias, right, from the data set, but also there is fighting the adoption of these systems by basically making a mistake in the past, right? So I think these systems really have an uphill battle and are gonna get challenged by many groups of being right because of past failures.
And I think this is where designers, sorry, just last one thing, this is where designers can think beyond the technology. Like, great, the technology does that. Are we sure that's the right thing? So the importance of designers as part of the quality check, to me, is key. Go on,
Right.
Allison.
I'm thinking about the question, Jonathan, that you proposed, and I'm also looking at the comment that Kayla, I believe, if I'm pronouncing your name right, mentioned about distrust, especially among women and minorities who may not already trust the skills of doctors. And I have this habit of a very specific thought exercise that I sometimes do no matter what I've been researching or designing. And I essentially ask myself, if this was a human, how would I handle this if this was another human? Because hopefully I have a certain amount of flexibility and interaction with it. And by that, I mean, so if we know that distrust already exists in humans, we can hear a human, not even an AI, and go, okay, that person's really biased, or okay, I have no trust in what that person just said. Should I trust it? Wait, that person seems really authoritarian. They're wearing the lab coat. Like, if you think about that scenario, I think this thought exercise also opens up the conversation, which is, well, how would we rebuild trust? If you have lost trust in a person, what does that person who has unfortunately lost your trust need to do or demonstrate to slowly move it back? So if, to your point, Jonathan, with the bad PR and the negative taste in the mouth that some people may have, the question I think is, well, all right, if that's the case, what's the path to rebuilding? And I know that's kind of your question, but I think about it then in human terms, which might involve, all right, how will we demonstrate that things are different now? How will we being the industry, which any industry that's using any type of technology that might have had a bad reputation that makes you distrust it, whether that's social media, whether that's in any group, what would be necessary for you to rebuild it? And I wonder if that's partially, how am I going to show my work? how am I going to make my reasoning and my logic really clear to you so that you can check, to double check? How am I going to make you be able to open it up? I think part of, for example, the reason peer reviews in scientific journals were there was to sort of say, don't believe me, let my peers test the quality of this work. And if it stands up to that scrutiny, we'll go. And people have critiqued at times the current status of peer reviews because it's also vulnerable to certain situations. So I think this is an occasion for us, just like I think we're all saying, is what's the next generation, as much as this is the next generation of AI, what's the next generation of ways in which we're going to build trust? I think we're going to find different approaches to actually building trust that aren't what we had before. They're going to have to be more sophisticated and more advanced. And it'll be really interesting for science.
I think this was a great ending. Thank you for wrapping us up. We are at time. I really appreciate. We have a great panelist today and a great group of questions. So I'm really excited about this. And hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.